Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Janessa Goldbeck. I'm the California Director with Vet Voice Foundation. Vet Voice Foundation is a network of over 1.5 million veterans and supporters nationwide. One of our most pressing priorities is protecting and preserving America's public lands. Veterans and military families have a long-standing and well-documented track record of environmental advocacy. From Teddy Roosevelt, who created the modern Park Service as president following his military service, to Earl Schaefer, the first person to through hike the Appalachian Trail, who did so to walk the war off. To veterans and military members today who lend their voices to a variety of campaigns, veterans have been and remain at the forefront of environmental conservation campaigns. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and before I served in the Marines, I spent a lot of time outdoors. Throughout my time in the Marines, I was able to, when I was on breaks from deployment or training exercises, go into the woods with my friends and family as a way to decompress, get back to myself, and really appreciate the things that I was serving and defending overseas. So it is a real honor to be here today with one of my personal heroes, Congresswoman Katie Porter, who has been a staunch advocate not only for protecting the climate, but for preserving and protecting public lands. Before coming to Congress, Representative Porter spent nearly 2 decades taking on special interests that dominate American politics, and drown out the voices of working families. A lifelong consumer advocate, she taught bankruptcy law at the University of California Irvine School of Law. In Washington, D.C., Congresswoman Porter has remained committed to putting Orange County families first. As a member of the House Oversight and Reform Committee and vice chair of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, she's asked tough questions of bank CEOs and administration officials to hold them accountable to the American people. She's also a proud member of the House Natural Resources Committee, where she works tirelessly to protect our beaches and public lands, to elevate science-based solutions to the climate crisis, and keep Orange County families safe from wildfires. She chairs the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, where she leads efforts to hold polluters accountable, and she's a leading proponent of disability access to national parks, and the Every Kid Outdoors program, which provides fourth graders and their families free access to national parks for 1 year. Congresswoman Porter, it's an honor to have you with us here today. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you so much, Janessa. I saw on Twitter that you said you were, quote, K-pop teenager fangirl level excited to moderate that panel. That is a real honor. And I'm as thrilled as you are to be part of this conversation about our public lands. As you know, our parks, our public lands, they belong to all of us as Americans. And these national treasures must be accessible to everyone. As you mentioned, I'm the chair of the House Natural Resources Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. And in that role, I am really pushing to make this commitment of accessibility to all, of truly public lands, a reality. Our parks need to be affordable for lower income families. They need to be accessible for people with disabilities or special needs, and they need to be reachable for people who rely on public transportation. The pandemic has certainly reminded all of us about the benefits of outdoor recreation, and what we're seeing is more Americans than ever before visiting our parks and forests, and that is a great thing. But it makes investments in upkeep, in accessibility, in conservation all the more urgent. The very first hearing that I chaired as subcommittee chair was titled Accessibility for People with Disabilities at National Parks and Public Lands. And one of our witnesses was an Army veteran who had deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. And upon return, she found that outdoor recreation, spending time on our public lands, really helped her find peace. She was able to help transition to a new version of herself, both mentally, physically, enjoying that recreation and the solitude that it provided. And I was really, really proud that she was willing to share her story with my colleagues. And I convened that hearing precisely because I want to help Congress understand why accessibility to national parks is so important. I was thrilled that that hearing was extremely bipartisan in terms of participation from Republican and Democratic colleagues alike. We had multiple witnesses from the Republican side, including additional veterans who shared their stories about enjoying public lands. Now, there is growing science, this is not just anecdotal, there is growing scientific evidence about the benefits of outdoor recreation for everyone, especially for veterans. Experiencing nature, participating in outdoor activities, it can help foster healing, self-confidence, and decrease the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, unfortunately, there are barriers that stop Americans with disabilities from enjoying our public lands. What's more, as I mentioned, our parks are overcrowded and they are underfunded. On the House Natural Resources Committee, I'm going to continue to be pushing my colleagues to understand these barriers and to work on legislation to help break them down. In closing, I want to highlight that increasing accessibility to trails, to fishing, to recreation, to camping can also help us meet our sustainability and conservation goals. These things are not in tension. In fact, good sustainable trail design, for example, is actually also exactly consistent with disability access to those trails. The exact same grade and slope, angles, design, erosion control that makes trails accessible to people with disabilities also helps prevent erosion, makes those trails last longer, and helps sustain the species, plant and animal species that exist on those public lands. So we can both make outdoor recreation more accessible while making it more sustainable, while preserving the very lands that we're trying to protect. I strongly believe that all Americans should have the opportunity to enjoy our national parks and forests, and I'm really honored to be here with you and others today to talk about how we can preserve those public lands while increasing access for every American, including our veterans, to enjoy them.
Well, Congressman Porter, thank you so much. As a disabled veteran and the child of a disabled parent, that accessibility issue is near and dear to my heart, and I really appreciate your efforts and laser-like focus on that. Thank you so much. I also want to introduce Major General retired Paul Eaton, who's joining us today. General Eaton served more than 30 years in the United States Army, including combat and post-combat assignments in Iraq, Bosnia, and Somalia. His Army assignments include infantry command from the company to brigade levels and command of the infantry center at Fort Benning and chief of infantry. His most recent operational assignment was commanding general of the command charged with reestablishing Iraqi security forces from 2003 to 2004, where he built the command and established the structure and infrastructure for the Iraqi Armed Forces and Interior Ministry security forces. Other operational assignments include Somalia, Bosnia, and Albania. Other assignments include the Joint Staff Deputy Commanding General for Transportation and Stryker Unit Development, and Assistant Professor and Head of the French Department at West Point. He's a 1972 graduate of West Point, and I know joins us from his vehicle where he is actually headed there now to visit one of his children. He has 3 children, all of them are soldiers. General Eaton, thank you so much for being here today.
Janessa, thank you very much, and I can't believe I did all that. So it is a great pleasure, Congressman Porter, to be with you. I've watched you on TV. I watched you particularly notable event with Jamie Dimon, and you are unforgettable, and we are honored to have you here with us. So we're talking public lands, and we've spoken about veterans who use public lands to walk off the war, not unlike the book of a troubled young woman who walks the Pacific Coast Trail, later a movie with Reese Witherspoon to lay that out. And it's the same dynamic for all of us as we come back. And my wife is a veteran and has spoken of everybody who comes back from overseas carries baggage of some sort. So public lands are a critical part of getting better. I spent about 15 years overseas, a lot of it in Europe and the Middle East. And the folks that I work with, the Europeans, the folks in the Middle East I've been with, they talk about Americans who come overseas to see castles and cathedrals. They recognize and tell us the beauties that we have. Our patron saint, Teddy Roosevelt, started this whole thing. And they recognize the beauty and value of what they are able to do in the United States. They also recognize that since the Land Water Conservation Fund was established in '64, our population has tripled, but we have not tripled our access to public lands. So we are thrilled to see President Biden's America the Beautiful approach and his vow to bring 30% of our public lands and waters under protection and under preservation at the national level. So that, coupled with the reform on oil and gas leasing and the proper stewardship that you, Congresswoman, are very much a motivating factor and point person on, we are thrilled to have you do that. You're our champion. Thank you very much for being here with us, and I look forward to any questions. Janessa, over to you.
Thank you, General. Congresswoman, my first question is for you. You know, I'm a post 9/11 veteran, and my entire adult life and some of my teenage years have been spent at war. I'm personally so grateful to President Biden for having the courage and commitment to ending the war in Afghanistan and getting us out of the forever wars. But I'm deeply concerned about the future of our and security challenges that we're facing. I personally believe, and many other veterans believe, that climate change is the greatest threat to our national security. And a big part of that is related to oil and gas. You know, the oil and gas leasing system on public lands is broken and it needs significant reforms. I know that you've been a huge outfront leader on this. Can you talk about your efforts to reform the broken oil and gas leasing system on public lands and to hold polluters accountable?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, General, for your kind words, and Janessa for this question. You know, we started my remarks by talking about how public lands belong to all of us. And I think particularly in a time when we're seeing so many divides in our country along so many different issues, not just political, but other, it's public lands, the collective, the sense that we all own these and we all benefit from them is really an important value to reinforce. Now, the big oil and big gas companies have been one of the most powerful forces in Washington lobbying for many, many decades. And what they have done to date is essentially freeze the oil and gas leasing system on public lands decades and decades back. In fact, the rental rate for drilling on public land, the sort of price you pay to reserve the land, basically to control the ability to drill on it, hasn't changed since I was in junior high. And the royalty rate, what you pay when you extract from those public lands, hasn't changed in more than a century. And states who have public lands are charging rental rates that are much higher than the federal government. Even states that have very large extractive economies, places like Texas, charge more than the federal government. Essentially, we as taxpayers are subsidizing oil and gas leasing on public land rather than charging a fair market return. And what charging that fair return lets us do is then take those resources and make investments in the kinds of conservation and expansion programs that will protect our public lands, that will allow us to identify additional vulnerable environments, to do resilience work around climate change, and to create public lands that are more accessible. So I have a bill called the Ending Taxpayer Welfare for Oil and Gas Companies Act. And we're debating right now, trying to get this put in as part of our efforts to make sure that this budget that we put together and that we pass in the upcoming weeks pays for the exact kinds of conservation programs that we're doing. So I encourage everyone to call the representative to let them know that they want this, they want the oil and gas companies to pay a fair price to the American taxpayers when they use what's ours, our public lands.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all you're doing on that front. My next question is around the 30 by 30 initiative, which General Eaton has mentioned already. But as I said at the beginning, you know, for many veterans, for myself, public lands are a place of refuge. And places like the Santa Ana Mountains and the Cleveland National Forest, located in your district, are really special to many veterans and military families and the population at large. So President Biden has issued a call to action that leaders of every level of government work together to conserve, connect, and restore 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. Congresswoman, could you talk about the work you're doing to meet this goal, both in your district and across the country?
Yep. Well, as General Eaton indicated, this is a very impressive initiative that President Biden has launched. It's one that enjoys wide support across the political spectrum and across the country. And so, one of the things that I think each representative needs to be doing is working hand in hand with local groups, local conservation groups, local environmental protection groups, local outdoor recreation groups to identify public lands that need additional protection. So for some public areas like Cleveland National Forest, which is in the 45th Congressional District that I'm honored to represent, this might mean upgrading the protection from a national forest to a national monument. We might see other things go from national monument all the way to national park. But we also have to identify new places, places where the local community perhaps doesn't have the resources to do the conservation and protective work. And think about the fact that as General Eaton mentioned, our population has grown tremendously, and the population distribution has changed. And that means we need to be looking at protecting different parts of land in different parts of the country so that we can make it affordable and accessible for everybody to enjoy these lands. Appreciating our public lands doesn't mean that you have to go to Yellowstone and battle the crowds. It means that there are places of peace, places for wildlife to flourish, places for observation and restoration that are nearby. And so part of the 30 by 30 initiative is really working hand in hand with community and with community leaders to identify what are the lands that we need to protect and how can we do that. It's also about doing some of the restoration work that will create more public lands that we can enjoy. And on this front, I want to highlight the work that my colleagues and I are doing around abandoned wells and abandoned mine lands. Many of these, it was on public land, and these companies did it, they extracted from the land. They are supposed to plug those wells, cap those mines, make those lands safe again for people to enjoy, for recreation, and safe for animals and wildlife. The bonds that they pay are simply not high enough to cover the cleanup costs. These companies drill, they go bankrupt, and they leave the problem for the taxpayers to either have to pay for the cleanup, to pay for the restoration, or we're not, that those sit there and those lands become hazards rather than becoming accessible public treasures. So we're working on that to understand that that's really, really important that we do that. And this also is a huge source of job creation, by the way, including for people who have a background in working in oil and gas. Here's a fun fact. When President Obama launched an initiative around dealing with oil wells and abandoned mine lands, California put so many people to work doing this. We had such a big problem with it that we actually ran out of qualified contractors to do the work. So when we talk about how can we make sure that as we move forward with energy transition, that there are good, high-paying, quality jobs for everybody, this 30 by 30, this restoration and conservation work is going to be a big part of how we not only expand public lands, but also expand our economy at the same time.
Well, I really appreciate that you brought up the orphan and abandoned well cleanup. I think that that's such an important issue to folks in California, but in particular to tribal and Native American groups all across the country. And I know that California has a very large population of Native Americans, I think the largest in the country. And there are quite a few in your district, quite a few tribes in your district as well. I was wondering if you could talk about what sort of engagement your office has with the tribal communities around preservation and protection of public lands.
Yeah, it's really important that, like I mentioned, we're doing these activities in partnership. Our indigenous communities have a very long and very sort of storied history of engaging with the lands that they live off of and that they live on in a way that protects them and honors them. That means paying attention both to conservation issues, but also cultural issues. How can we design and create opportunities for Americans to appreciate national treasures, public lands, monuments, at the same time that we're allowing indigenous people to protect things that are sacred and to observe things. So that really is about conversation, it's about listening, and it's about leadership. And I think having Secretary Deb Haaland, who herself is a enrolled tribe member at at the helm as Secretary of the Department of Interior is really setting an important tone that we're going to protect our public lands in concert, in partnership with our Indigenous communities. Again, that is a needless tension. Instead, we ought to be looking to them to help lead us and to teach us, and by the way, to make sure that we're creating job opportunities for Indigenous people to work in our national parks, to work on our national forests, to do this conservation work, so that we're also making sure that the people who have lived on and near these public lands are the same people who are involved in protecting and promoting them.
Thank you so much. I want to be conscious of your time, so I just have one more quick question. I saw a really cute video of you talking with your daughter about every kid outdoors and surprising her with a trip to Zion National Park. Could you tell us a little bit more about that initiative and why it's so important to veterans and military families?
Yes, so Every Kid Outdoors is a terrific program that allows every fourth grader. So if you have grandchildren, General Eaton, and you have children and grandchildren and friends, tell them all about this program. Every fourth grader in the country can get a free pass for their family to enjoy the national parks for a year. We have similar programs, of course, for seniors. But one of the issues with Every Kid Outdoors has been it's not just about having the free pass, it's also about designing programs to help kids and families whose parents maybe don't have that experience outdoors, get outdoors. It's about doing programs in partnerships with schools and youth programs, creating transportation. Kids who go outdoors early tend to continue to enjoy the outdoors their entire lives. So we need to make sure that we're making our public lands accessible for kids who maybe don't have that exposure, who maybe don't have a vehicle. And so this part of what I've been fighting for is not just money to keep the program, but money to make sure the program works for everyone, not just for the people who know about it. So we had a terrific trip to Zion National Park. It was amazing. We also went to Dixie National Forest. My two older sons, they're 13 and 15, caught their first fish, which was really exciting and fun. We did a lot of hiking, we did camping, we did cooking. We really, really had a fabulous trip. And look, I'm a single mom of 3 kids. I grew up in rural Iowa in a farm community. We couldn't take expensive vacations, but we could afford to get in our car and go camp. And that is true for so many Americans. So this is about making sure that every family has that opportunity to enjoy our public lands and really to get kids out there early, teaching them what's at stake in our public lands, to teach them that appreciation so we can continue to build that enjoyment and that political will to protect these lands for years to come. So I'm thrilled to announce that we were able to get additional funding into the reconciliation package for Every Kid Outdoors to do that programmatic work. So it's not a press release. It really is changing people's lives. It's a program that's delivering on the ground.
So awesome.
Brilliant.
And I mean, does the whiteboard come with you on camping trips, or does that stay home?
No, actually, I left the whiteboard behind. It was one of the few things that I did not bring. I needed a little bit of a break from it. But I was very, very proud. I am very, very organized, and I don't think I forgot a single thing. I did have to do one meeting on my trip, and I did it from Zion National Park in the background, and it was a hearing. It was a hearing on environmental issues, so it was the perfect place to be doing it. But one of the things I did on my trip was talk with the superintendent at Zion National Park and with the Disability Services Coordinator about how thrilled they are that more people are coming to the national parks, but how that creates a need for greater investment to make sure that as more people enjoy the parks, we're not losing some of the opportunities for solitude, for wilderness, for exploration, and for those kinds of challenges. And so it's really important to go and see things for yourselves, to listen to those stories on the ground. And I was thrilled to be able to take a short trip with my family this summer.
So amazing. Well, Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us today. You have the opportunity, if you would like to make some closing remarks. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I don't have much to say in closing except thank you. I think it is so important, particularly in this time of political division, that we are identifying issues where we can draw every American together and to come together in support of these things. Veterans Voice Foundation is really, really doing important work in lifting up these issues and helping our veterans know that we see them, we see their needs, and we're fighting to make sure that things, including our public lands, are accessible to them while they're training, while they're, when they come home, when they're recovering, and as they go about enjoying their lives, having served our country. So I'm really, really excited about our partnership. I'm grateful for the General's participation, and I look forward to continuing the work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, General Eaton. Thank you, Congresswoman. You've been such a champion for these issues. As chair of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of the House Natural Resources Committee, you know better than anyone the importance of preserving our public lands for veterans and for all Americans. So on behalf of Vet Voice Foundation, we deeply appreciate your efforts to protect our natural resources, your leadership in taking on big oil and securing updates to our antiquated oil and gas leasing system, and ensuring our national parks can be enjoyed by all Americans, including children and those with disabilities. Thank you so much for your leadership and for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to all of us who tuned in. We'll see you next time.